Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. We've heard a lot about wealth and income inequality in the United States. It's bad. But my guest says it's even worse than we realize, and that it's doing a real number on our traditional American way of life, including our cherished democracy. I'm pleased to welcome Les Leopold, author of the new book, Runaway Inequality, An Activist's Guide to Economic Justice. Les, thanks for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So give us a sense of just how extreme inequality has become in the United States.
Well, in 1970, the ratio of the top 100 CEO pay and the average worker was 45 to 1. So that's like one car for the average worker, 45 for the average CEO.
Right.
And if you ask the American people what the ratio is right now, they'll say 45 to 1. We just got the new numbers in. It's 844 to 1.
844
to 1.
to 1. So for every dollar an ordinary worker makes, the average CEO makes $844.
Top 100.
Top 100, yeah.
And so think about it this way. If the average worker can afford a home, the top CEO can afford 844 homes. It's totally beyond comprehension. People will say, well, so what? You know, they get more. Maybe they help us build jobs, et cetera. We all get more.
Yeah.
That's not the narrative. Their extreme wealth is coming at our expense, and that's the story of the book.
So you have this tremendous wealth rising for those who are at the top, but you don't have a comparable increase or much of an increase at all for those who are in the middle, or certainly not those down near the bottom.
Right. The number we use is called the non-supervisory and production workers, which are 85% of the whole workforce. Mm-hmm. From World War II to the mid-1970s, as productivity rose, so did the real wage of the average worker. Since 1977, that wage has actually gone down.
The idea was, because you always wanted workers to be more productive, the idea was workers would become more productive and then they would share in the profits that came from this increased productivity. So that stopped. But how is it that what happens now is that all the profits, or almost all the profits, from increased productivity goes to the bosses, to the corporations, the CEOs, et cetera. Why did that change, and why did workers allow this to change?
Well, it's interesting. I was in graduate school right when the change was going on, or just before it happened. And we were taught it was an iron law, that as productivity went up, so did real wages. Unions didn't have anything to do with it. It was just supply and demand and corporate. It would happen. As soon as I graduated, they repealed the law.
They repealed that iron law. Right.
Gone. And what happened was there was a virtual intellectual takeover of economic and public policy in this country, and the former notions of a more benevolent interventionist state were thrown out the window. And Milton Friedman and the Chicago School people literally in the 70s gained dominance. And they captured the imagination of both political parties, and they put together a plan which we call the Better Business Climate Plan. Academics call it neoliberalism, but that's a confusing term because there's the word liberal in it. Mm-hmm. Nothing liberal about this. It was cut taxes on corporations and the wealthy, cut back regulations, almost all regulations on business should disappear because they create inefficiencies, and cut back social spending, stop coddling unions, because people should be hungry and go out there and work. And that would come together and create an investment and profit boom, and then all boats would rise. But there was the dirty little secret of the Better Business Climate model is when you deregulate finance, it's a whole lot different than when you deregulate the real economy. It's one thing to deregulate trucking, airlines, telecommunication, all of which happened then.
Yeah.
But when they deregulated Wall Street, it set in motion what we describe in the book as financial strip mining. It allowed this pack of corporate raiders, we now call them hedge funds, private equity companies, in polite names. They borrow a little bit, they use a little bit of their own money. They borrow a huge amount of money, and they go out and buy corporation after corporation and then try to strip the wealth out of the companies. This is not an exaggeration. And the trick of it is, if you go out and buy a car with a loan, who pays back the loan? You or the car? You do.
Right.
But when a hedge fund or a private equity company buys a company with a huge amount of debt, they stick the debt on the company.
The company pays back
Yeah,
the
it's
loan.
as if the car would pay back your loan.
Yeah.
So there was no corporate debt virtually in the 1970s and before. And the line goes up just like this, just as runaway inequality goes up. So you have this phenomena of companies being loaded up with debt. The interest payments on that debt are not taxable. So their contributions to federal, state, and local revenues go down, corporate taxes go down. The second little thing that happens, and this is what was very hard for unions or working people or anybody to stop. In 1982, Reagan appointed a guy from E.F. Hutton to be head of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And this guy believed in this new philosophy of efficiency. Everything the government does is inefficient. Everything the private sector does through the market will be the most optimal distribution of resources. I was taught that in graduate school too. So this guy really bought it. Okay. The rule he changed was the ability for a corporation to buy back its own stock. Sounds arcane. Why do we have this rule? Well, because from 1933 to 1982, this was considered stock manipulation.
Right.
And if you let corporations do this, they would manipulate their own stock, because if you buy back shares, you reduce the ownership
Increasing the value of the
of
share.
each share. It's easy to see if there are 5 owners and you reduce to 4, each share is worth more. It works with millions of shares as well. Now, so what? They changed the rule, big deal. Well, this is the key. The corporate raiders changed the way the CEOs are paid. In 1980, the average CEO was paid 95% salary and bonuses, 5% stock incentives. Today, it's 5% salary and bonuses, 95%
Flipped.
stock. Yeah.
So the incentive, of course, is to just do whatever you can to raise that stock price.
Right. So what did they do? And this is the part, this is the strip mining. They took every penny they could find in the corporation to buy back their own shares, thereby raising the value of their stock incentives and cashing in. The investors who come in, the big ones, they want to see the same thing, and then they're out, pump and dump. Again, it sounds like I could be exaggerating. Here's a fact that's clearly delineated on a chart in this book. In 1980, corporations spent 2% of their profits buying back their own shares. By 2007, they spent 75% of all their corporate profits. I'm talking about the top 500 companies. 75%. You throw in dividends, they used more than 100% of their revenues, their profits, to buy back their own shares. How do they pay for this? They strip mine their company. They move jobs overseas.
Yep.
They globalize. They get rid of product lines. They squeeze wages and benefits. That's why your middle class jobs are disappearing.
Talk about the kind of impact that has on the society as a whole.
Well, that's a direct impact, right? And you could see, basically they also got rid of unions as fast as they could. They took advantage of international labor markets. This was the drive towards globalization, the strip mining process. But there are other effects that are just as pernicious, and to some people actually much more dangerous. When worker wages went flat and down, this of course put a damper on tax revenues.
Yep.
People are only going to pay so much.
At the same time, by the way, as the very wealthy were paying as little in taxes as they possibly could. So,
Well, please, let's write the next book together. I would be honored. Corporate revenues, tax revenues went down dramatically, at least by half, because all that debt on the corporations, all the interest payments are tax deductible, just like interest payments on a home is tax deductible. So their corporate revenues went down. Some people in Congress spotted this in 1982. They said, hey, what are you doing? You're killing our revenues. And they said, you're not changing that rule.
They actually said it was a good thing because they said, let's starve the government of revenues.
Right.
That would be beneficial.
And then, so now we have, so that's two. And then you mentioned the third, which is when inequality becomes extreme, the super rich just stop paying taxes. Right now, there's $21 trillion being held offshore by wealthy people. What we see in the tax revenues is a tip of the iceberg. They're paying already, they're only paying maybe 20%, 18%. We're losing at least $150 billion in tax revenue. So what we now have in this country is we have on the state and local level, counting all taxes, we have a perfectly regressive tax system. The top 1% pay half as much as a percentage as the bottom 20%. And it's like a pyramid. The more you make, the less you pay in state and local taxes. Now let me share one more very heavy result of this. You know, the prison population in the United States was perfectly flat from 1920 to 1980. Through all the 60s and all the turmoil and the rebellions in the street, on the campuses and in the streets, all that, flat. After 1980, the prison population shoots up in tandem with runaway inequality. We now have the largest prison population in the entire world, both in absolute number and in percentage, higher than China, Russia, North Korea, Cuba. And this is a direct result of that Better Business Climate model because basically we gave up on using the government to provide decent jobs for people who had trouble finding it. So the youth unemployment rate now for inner city youth, 50%. 50%. In the 60s, for all our problems, we tried to do something about this. We tried to attack, there was a war on poverty.
Yep.
When the Better Business Climate model came in, the war on poverty became prison. You want a war on, that's our war on poverty. Right now, think carefully, except for maybe Bernie Sanders, what candidate dares talk about increasing public sector jobs?
They won't talk about it. They won't talk about poverty. They'll make a stab at talking about the middle class, whether they have a real program or not. They'll at least mention the middle class. They won't even mention the poor.
You're absolutely right.
And in this country now, almost 40% of all black kids growing up in the United States are poor. I think it's 38% is the latest number from Pew Research. That is a tragic and staggering number.
Incredible. And in the book, we spend 2 chapters going after the idea of American exceptionalism. You listen to all the candidates, it makes you want to throw up, right? You know, America, God bless America, best country in the whole world. Based on what? For the super rich, it is the best country in the whole world, right? They have their own schools, their own airports even. You know, they don't use our crumbling infrastructure. They just do what they want to do, and it's a great country for them, their own healthcare system. We rank second to last amongst developed countries in childhood poverty. We rank number 1 in inequality. The countries with the lowest amount of inequality, which are the Northern European countries, have almost no childhood poverty.
Right.
We are behind on early childhood education. We're behind in higher education. We make our teachers work longer and pay them less than most European countries. We have our...
And we get poorer results.
Right. And our health statistics, our longevity is below most of other countries, but we pay more for health care than any other country. So we're falling behind steadily country after country, and I mentioned we lead the world in prisoners. This is going to catch up with us. If the American people, and this is the purpose of the book, we're trying to convey in this book that there is no magic pendulum in the economy. This is the big takeaway. It doesn't swing, it's not going to swing back towards more justice, from more inequality, and then pretty soon there'll be less inequality. It doesn't work that way. Since the last recession, there's been growth of income in the country. The economy has grown. 95% of that growth has gone to the top 1%.
Right at the top.
Right at the top. So that's one takeaway. The second takeaway then is, in order to change this, we have to build a very vibrant mass movement, because we can't rely on, until we pressure the system, it's set up, as you just pointed out. Both political parties are afraid to talk about poverty. Right. Both political parties still buy the Better Business Climate model. You have a revolving door between Wall Street and Washington with the outrageous salaries now on Wall Street, and you're a staffer on Congress. You're going to bite the hand that's going to feed your family a few years from now? So we have democracy. We have the wealthy primaries now, right? It's which rich person you can get in your campaign determines, except for Bernie Sanders at the moment, determines whether you're going to be able to survive as a candidate.
So you're not just giving up your quality of life, your standard of living, which is diminishing. You're actually giving up your democracy, because the ordinary American no longer has the say that he or she should have in a fully functioning democracy.
As bad as we think it is, it's worse. Gillens and Page, a couple of political scientists, did this incredible analysis of 1,700 bills that went through Congress over the last decade. Mm-hmm. In no case did the average American's wishes get fulfilled in legislation if it didn't correspond with the wealthy.
Right.
In no case. They had, they did this sort of complicated multivariate regression analysis. They had zero independent influence. So functionally speaking, we're a plutocracy now.
Exactly.
We are
right.
pure plutocracy.
And then one of the things that happens when you starve the government of revenue, tax revenues, is you can no longer make the kind of investments that you need to make, whether it's infrastructure or education or healthcare or research and development or that sort of thing. And I want to talk specifically about infrastructure, which is a pet peeve of mine. We have come through this period where interest rates have been near zero for the longest time, which would be a great time to make the kind of investments, because you can borrow money cheaper than it's ever possible to do again. But we didn't do anything like that. But if you invested in infrastructure, you would create all these jobs. You would create really great jobs with huge infrastructure push, and it also would provide a platform for new industry in the United States. Why do we not do this? It seems to me like a no-brainer, and yet we're not doing it.
Because it's a violation of the Better Business Climate model.
It's a violation. They don't want it.
They don't want government to be that active. There's a proposal that I put forth actually 6-7 years ago, which speaks directly to what you're talking about. Two forms of infrastructure in my mind: there's human infrastructure and the physical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. A very small tax on Wall Street. A financial speculation tax, transaction tax, Robin Hood tax, whatever they call it, mm-hmm. A fraction of 1%.
A fraction that would not hurt anyone.
You never even see it. But it moves $350 billion from Wall Street to the real economy. And that could provide free higher education for at every public 2-year, 4-year graduate program in the country, just like most of Europe has free higher education.
Right.
Could retire some of the student debt, and that money would be there for the infrastructure if repairs, which are, by the way, were rated as a D, grade letter D, failing grade virtually.
Right.
It could happen, and I think the American people are ripe for this, assuming we can get the education out. This book is part of an education campaign. None of the royalties are going to me personally. We're plowing it back in. We're training trainers to go out and give the message. We're modeling ourselves after the populists of the 1880s. They feel that was the last time somebody really took on Wall Street, because they were getting completely crushed. There was no Federal Reserve. Wall Street controlled the money supply, and they were just screwing the small farmers across the country. They fielded 6,000 educators across the country. So given our population now, we need 30,000. You're one of them, so we're down to 29,999.
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
Okay. So one of the things that I never did understand is you had these concepts like trickle down and this idea, this notion that everyone would benefit if you gave enormous tax cuts to the wealthy. How is it that anyone bought into this at all? And why did people in the media ever take this seriously? Trickle down just seems preposterous to me, but especially now because we've seen it not work for such a long period of time.
Well, that's a very good question, and yet another book in the making there. Partly is who owns the media, whose interest is it to make the case. The other is, I think, there is this tradition in America, a strong one, of personal responsibility. So when trickle down doesn't work, people blame themselves, right? I couldn't find a job. There's no job there for you.
Right.
There's no job that, your fast food job is paying a non-livable wage. It's not there. So people blame themselves. And it takes a very courageous political leaders and political movements to say, you know what? The game is rigged. It's not your fault. We can come together and change this and create employment opportunities for you so that things will trickle up instead of trickle down.
So now you mentioned that you could use, for example, a stock transactions tax to make higher education affordable, or in some cases even free. We have, of course, just the opposite. We have all these kids taking on tremendous debt so that as soon as they graduate from college, they can look forward to something like a mortgage sitting on their shoulders. My first question is, what sense does this make? But my second question is this sustainable?
No, it's not. And what's amazing, the discovery, as I was telling you before we started, my son got me into this book because he was so upset about the homelessness that he saw in New York City. Mm-hmm. And it sort of drove me to try to figure out, well, what happened? Why is there all this homelessness? What you find is that chart after chart, student debt, there's almost no student debt in the 1960s and 70s. Right. New York and California were completely free. The Big Ten schools, you had a summer job, you could cover tuition. And then student debt rises. Runaway inequality rises. Corporate debt rises. You have trend after trend after trend. Money parked offshore rises. It all connects to runaway inequality. It's the fundamental driver of all these other problems we face. There's no need to have student debt. It's a direct consequence of runaway inequality.
If you had a magic wand, you were in charge of the economy in the U.S., what would be the first one or two steps you would take to begin to turn the situation around?
After appointing you to head of the Fed, I would, the financial transaction tax would be one. Mm-hmm. A second thing would be get rid of that rule that allows them to buy back their own shares.
Right.
That'll stop the strip mining in a hurry. Take away interest payment deductions on corporate debt over $500,000. And then the big shocker is I would advocate public banking. Let me lay this one on you. One victory of the populist movement was a public bank that was formed in, of all places, North Dakota.
Uh-oh.
North Dakota has a public bank. It is the most profitable bank in the United States.
Why haven't we heard about this bank?
You'll find out in a second. Its CEO gets paid $260,000 a year. The average CEO of a top 100 corporation gets $30 million.
Yeah.
When you ask the American people what they think a fair ratio is between CEO and average worker, they'll say 8-1. Strong Democrat says 5-1. Strong Republican says 12-1. It averages out 8-1.
So even Republicans don't want the levels of inequality that we have now.
Right. North Dakota's ratio, the bank is 8-1. Exactly 8-1. I called them up. I got all this data. When they loan out $100,000 to a business, they work through 70 community banks. Every $100,000 they loan out creates one permanent new job in the state of North Dakota. That's the criteria for the loan. So you have, and they didn't lose any, they've had a string of profits going back a dozen years. They didn't lose any money during the Great Crash because they didn't gamble on any of those derivatives.
Right.
And they do one other thing. When you pay your taxes, you're in New York, sometimes you have to pay maybe some extra to Albany. Where does it go? I'm in New Jersey, it goes to Trenton. Where does it go? Mm-hmm. It goes into a Wall Street bank because they handle the cash management. In 49 states, it goes into a large bank, $1 trillion, except in North Dakota. So my one issue with Bernie Sanders is it's not enough just to break up the big banks. Taking a $2 trillion bank and turning it into a $400 billion bank is not going to solve our problems. It'll help, but we need a rival system, like the public option in healthcare. We need a rival system, and 50 state banks would be a great way to get there.
I love it. Les Leopold, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. Police in North Las Vegas, Nevada, report that a woman was shot and wounded by her son, a police officer, and his wife, also a police officer. The woman lived with her son and daughter-in-law and was returning home around 11:30 at night. The two police officers said they mistook their relative for an intruder and opened fire. According to police, more than 24 rounds were unleashed, but somehow the woman was shot only in the leg. Her wounds were not life-threatening. These were police officers, mind you, supposedly trained in the use of firearms. Each day, there are reports of much worse catastrophes in households where guns were purchased by misguided men and women in the mistaken belief that they would keep the household safer. President Obama is committed to taking executive action to heighten, at least somewhat, our miserably weak restrictions on the purchase and possession of guns. For those who still don't understand why, just consider that today alone, guns will be used to kill nearly 300 people in the United States, men, women, and children. That's all for now. See you next time.